Hello everybody, my name is Liam Smyth, pronouns he and him, and I am going to be your host for today's event. I'm a white man in my 30s with red hair and glasses. If you require closed captions, we have these available today. If you would like closed captions, please select the auto transcript button in the bottom row of options on your screen. If there's anything else we can do to ensure an enjoyable experience for everybody today, please send us a message in the chat. But if I can please ask that you remain on mute for today's session, that really helps with the audio quality. So without further ado, let me say welcome, firstly, welcome to the final dissemination event of the Audience Agency's project, Digitally Democratizing Archives. We've got a lot to run through today, kicking off with a short intro to the project before I pass things over to my wonderful colleague, Nicky, who will give you a bit more of an overview of the entire project and what it was able to achieve. We'll then have a series of case studies from 5 of the projects we've been supporting. There'll be a 10-minute break at around the halfway point, and then we'll have an extended Q&A. If you can stay with us until the end, please prepare some questions for us and our projects, and we will answer your questions later. You can submit those questions in the chat throughout today's session, so I'll be looking at those over the next. Again, if I can ask everybody to mute themselves, thank you very much. It is unusual to begin a presentation with thank yous. But on this occasion, I believe it's appropriate. This project was a mammoth undertaking and simply wouldn't have been possible without working in collaboration. Firstly, a huge heartfelt thank you to DCMS and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, as this was a part of their Digital Skills for Heritage initiative. Without their generous support and constant encouragement throughout the entirety of the project, this work simply wouldn't have been possible. Secondly, I want to say thank you to our steering group, who were instrumental in co-designing the project with us and had a huge influence on the overall direction we took. The reason why we decided to deliver Digitally Democratizing Archives in the first place was, in short, find out how or even if digital technology can successfully bring communities and archives closer together. The centerpiece of our entire work were 10 action research projects. The 10 projects were selected through an open call that was launched in July last year. The open call asked for projects that demonstrate how digital technology can enrich and widen engagement with archive collections. The term action research means delivering a project or activity which is exploring an idea, taking a risk, or experimenting with new approaches, the results of which we were tracking and trying to understand the unpredictable outcomes. The important thing is that an archive or a new archive and a community collaborate to try out something new. The call out was deliberately left fairly open in order to inspire a broad range of initiatives to apply. We were really keen from the beginning that this project reached diverse groups, and we didn't want lots of the same types of organization applying. So the way in which we intended to reach as many different groups as possible was through a strategic communication approach. We were incredibly lucky to be working with lots of partners who were able to share the opportunity widely. We also benefited from cross-sharing with other projects that were being supported by the Digital Skills for Heritage program. Ultimately, we ended up with 76 applications that our steering group ultimately shortlisted down to 10. I'm going to briefly run through now the 10 projects we've been working with, all of whom are here today, and you'll be hearing much more from later on. So first of all, we had LGBT plus Oral Histories Digital Archive, and this was by Lgbt Foundation. They were creating a digital accessible archive of LGBT plus oral histories focused on community empowerment and queer activism in Greater Manchester and beyond. Then in London, we had Mapping Migration, Jewish Temporary Shelter Cards by the Jewish Museum. They were utilising georeferencing technologies to present information and stories gathered from newly digitized Jewish temporary shelter cards. Staying in London, we had Places Never Seen, a youth-led digital exploration of the 1911 Festival of Empire by South London Gallery. They were working with young people from diverse communities to examine an example of local colonial history and develop digital outputs through Wikimedia. Then in the Midlands, we had podcasts celebrating Bearwood women by Bearwood Community Hub. They were upskilling women from diverse backgrounds to build a contemporary archive in a local community hub. Then way up in Northumberland, we've got Preserving Cramlington Camera Club's digital archive, which was working with local youth groups to build contemporary collections of artifacts from Cramlington Camera Club in a former mining town. Back down to London, we had Silwood Video Archive Project by Spectacle Media, and they were working with communities from the Silwood estate in our participatory editing process to draw out stories from archival films made in the local area. This next project operated nationwide, and it was by Qisetna, called Stories from a Treasure, and they developed a podcast and translation service to build awareness and connections with Syrian communities living across the UK. Next, Tagalate by Cinema Nation CIC. They were creating an interactive online platform that will hold community archive material from intersectional underrepresented groups in the Liverpool L8 area. Then East Riding Blockdown, contemporary collecting in Minecraft by East Riding Archives. They were working with young people aged 11 to 16 to collect COVID-19 experiences via a reconstruction of the treasure house in Minecraft to house a new online archiverse. And then finally, Women in Lockdown by Sheffield Feminist Archive. They've been building an online open access digital archive that documents women's experiences of the pandemic. Those are the full 10 projects. And now I want to hand over to Nicky, who will give you a bit of an overview about the evaluation that took place across these 10 projects.
Thank you very much, Liam, and hello everybody. I'm Nicky. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman in my 30s with brown hair. So I've been working on the programme level evaluation of digitally democratising archives. And today I'm going to be talking through some headline outcomes and learning across the programme before we hear from the action research projects. So our evaluation focused on learning and development across 3 key strands, which were community engagement, archives, and digital. But I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the broader learning for the heritage sector that's come out of the programme, and also what the audience agency have learnt as an organisation from facilitating the project. If you're interested in knowing more, we're also publishing some public resources very soon, which will share learning and best practice from the programme. So there's going to be a case study for each of the projects, some digital service recipes, and some top tips on community engagement, which will be available on our website shortly. And I just want to say a really big thank you to all of the action research projects for their contribution to this evaluation as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I've just got a few slides to show you. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about engagement and reach. So as Liam said, the centrepiece of the programme was 10 action research projects. These projects were run in collaboration with 42 other organisations, and this resulted in a total of 246 participants overall across the programme. So this exceeded our original target of 150 participants. I'm really pleased about that. The diversity of participants and the geographic spread of the projects was a real success of the programme. And as Liam says, a targeted and collaborative approach to recruitment was particularly valuable in ensuring that the programme was inclusive and reaching communities that typically wouldn't engage with archives or archive services. So there was representation from young people, from intergenerational communities, from LGBTQ+ communities, refugees and migrants, women affected by the pandemic, and people with intersections of lived experience. So we're really, really pleased about this in terms of reach, but the evaluation also taught us that there's still work to be done to broaden and deepen that engagement, and to address the different barriers that different communities face in engaging with archives. One really important thing that we learned is that projects needed more time than they had to build trust and relationships with their community and to find the best way of working with them. And this was particularly the case for projects who were working with people who were sharing difficult stories or sensitive stories, for participants who had perhaps experienced trauma and needed time to feel ready to share their stories. And it's also worth mentioning that Omicron restrictions imposed some further limitations on the delivery of some projects within this timescale. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the digital outcomes and insights from the programme. So the digital upskilling of organisations and participants was one of the most significant outcomes of the programme. 90% of project leads said that they had developed new digital skills as a result of delivering their action research projects, and they felt that they could use these skills elsewhere within their role or their organisation. 80% felt that their organisation had developed its digital capabilities, and examples that projects gave us were developing digital workflows, developing digital communication approaches, upgrading software, and also general digital skills such as creating a website, managing volunteers online, and becoming more confident with using platforms such as Zoom. Project leads also developed some digital skills that were specific to archiving, including the use of digital cataloguing within archive services, using Preservica, and using transcription software such as Otter and Audiogram. And the project level evaluations told us that a broad range of digital skills were also developed by community participants. And this included using new digital platforms to collaborate, using specialist software to access or engage with archives, and using new digital equipment such as digital cameras. So the results of this in terms of outputs were that we have at least 22 new digital outputs that have been created as a result of the programme. So this includes 7 new digital community archives, several Wikipedia pages edited and updated, 10 case studies, 2 new digital collections for county archives, and 2 digital service recipes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the community engagement outcomes now. All of the project leads that we spoke to said that they developed new skills for working with communities as a result of the programme. And these skills ranged from conveying information in different formats, working with a group of people for the first time, such as young people, and facilitation skills, both for facilitating online and offline. 90% of projects said that they were developing their approach to community engagement as a result of the programme. And there were so many examples and approaches that emerged from evaluation as valuable. And because there were so many, we're going to be sharing these as top tips for community engagement on our website. But I just wanted to mention a few here. We learned that creative and artistic approaches can be helpful in helping people to engage with archives and heritage, particularly when working with difficult stories. So our projects told us about using music, exploring ideas through objects and sort of tactile engagement. So using clay or 3D modelling, using objects that represented archives, and one project which used a community post box for people to deposit their stories in, and had community post boxes in different locations, and that was a particularly successful engagement strategy. And one thing that emerged as really, really important is that having an archive service or an organisation proactively approach an individual or a community and invite them to take part and share their stories had a really strong connection with the value that that community or individual placed in that story. And a recurring theme throughout the programme was about organisations getting out into communities to meet people, not expecting those people to come to them. We also learned that sharing and depositing personal stories within archives can increase engagement with archive services, particularly among young people. So the act of telling one's story for the purposes of archiving was incredibly important, both in terms of having that story heard now and in the knowledge that that story would be available for people to hear in the future, for future generations. And projects also learnt about the need to look after themselves and their participants when working with difficult stories and for adequate support to be in place for both. So moving on to look at archiving outcomes and insights. 80% of project leads said that they developed new skills relating to archiving, which suggests that this area of skills development was perhaps not quite as successful as other project strands. And this was consistent with feedback that some organisations said that they would have liked a little bit more support with the basics of archiving, particularly for those who were new to it. We're also aware that there were people with professional archiving expertise on the programme. So this was an area where there were very different levels of expertise across the projects and experience. Nonetheless, evaluation indicated that there was a big learning curve relating to archiving practice across the programme. So this included people developing skills in indexing, cataloguing, creating an information sheet, record keeping, coding files, and creating consent forms. And alongside this, organisations developed some approaches to storing and preserving data. The evaluation taught us that a lot of community participants also learned a lot of new practical skills relating to archiving and about the value of archives generally. A key theme was the importance of preservation and how this could be supported through good archiving practice, such as clear tagging and having digital backups. Another theme that emerged was that participants had a greater appreciation of how everyday stories and events were worthy of preservation. So that was another example of how being invited to contribute a story was connected to that feeling that that story was important and that it had value. So looking at some of the wider heritage outcomes from the programme, there were lots of examples across the projects of community participants learning something new about their heritage or that of their community or their local area. And this included heritage of diaspora communities, intergenerational heritage, activism heritage, and the history of the British Empire from diverse perspectives. The programme also helped people to develop ideas on what archives can be and particularly what a community archive is for and who it represents. So one really nice quote that I pulled out, which I'm afraid I forgot to put on this slide, but I'll tell you it because I think it's a really nice perspective. Someone described a community archive as a space where we can make sure that things exist in people's own voices 100 years from now in very dynamic ways. Many participants had ideas about what a formal archive or archive service could learn from a community archive. For example, this idea of meeting people where they're at, not just inviting people in, but getting out into communities themselves. So that approach to community engagement was something community archives felt that they could offer to archive services. A really important outcome for many of the people who took part in the Places Never Seen project and these were young people, was that they felt that they'd developed the confidence to question and critique archives, specifically the narrative that can be presented by museums around colonial histories. So this was a really important example of how using creative and digital methods could support young people to develop their own ideas about heritage and to build the confidence to contribute to the archives. Many projects representing community archives also told us that they'd learned a lot from archive services, and this included the importance of preservation for future generations, the need to be systematic in the way that they collect information, and also about the ethics of oral history interviewing and good practice when gathering people's stories for the purposes of archiving. Sorry, I was a bit slow in moving the slide on there. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've learned as an organisation as a result of overseeing the programme. So the response from the Action Research Project has been absolutely incredible. Attendance and engagement across the activities was really high, and this really helped to give the programme momentum and direction. We had really positive responses to invitations to present, and you know, we all kind of agreed that projects seemed really proud to represent their projects, which was wonderful. We've learned a lot about what worked well when overseeing a programme like this, and this includes offering regular support and being available. Project leads appreciated the informality of the sessions and felt that the mentoring and the training sessions that the audience agency offered were quite useful. And people really appreciated the opportunity for continuous learning across the programme, so that was really helpful to know. A lot of project leads fed back that they particularly valued engaging with the other projects and learning from each other. And pretty much everyone said that they would have liked more time for this within the programme, more opportunities to do this. So that's really, really helpful to know. And if we were doing it again, we would certainly offer more opportunities for collaboration across projects. And we've had lots of brilliant suggestions for how we might do this, both during and beyond the life of a project, such as implementing a buddy system from the beginning, and also having an alumni group after the programme's finished. We've learned that a longer time frame is needed for project delivery, and this is primarily for projects to develop relationships with community groups, but also to do things like preparing and uploading digital footage, which took a lot longer than a lot of people anticipated, particularly for those people who were working with film content. And also just just a bit more space to reflect on learning for that, and for those kind of new skills to be embedded as well. While project leads really appreciated the support and the availability of the audience agency, the volume of information and communication occasionally felt a little bit overwhelming. So going forwards, there's an opportunity for us to streamline our comms and requests for information so that they're more accessible for participants. But overall, we've learned that there's a huge appetite for this side of this sort of work. And it's leading to lots of interesting conversations about what we offer next. So we would love you all to be a part of that ongoing conversation. So I'd like to finish with the question that was at the heart of the programme, really, about can or whether digital technology can help to bring communities and archives closer together. So for many projects, digital approaches enabled them to increase their reach because it was a more accessible method of participation for a lot of their participants. And this included people with caring responsibilities who wouldn't otherwise have been able to attend a workshop, and communities without a physical space to meet. For other projects, a face-to-face approach was necessary in order to reach their participants. And this included projects who were working with sensitive life story material for whom Zoom wasn't appropriate, and those training participants in digital photography skills. Differing levels of digital confidence and access to digital devices was a factor. And the programme taught us that this digital divide is not just about access to the internet and devices, but also about digital confidence and access to up-to-date devices which support communication software. So there's definitely some more work to be done to understand the barriers for different communities to engage digitally with heritage. So I guess the short answer to this big question is yes, and digital absolutely can be used to bring communities and archives closer together. We've learned that it can widen access and participation, but that it also depends very much on the needs of that community and the nature of the digital activities as well. Many other approaches have emerged as valuable alongside digital approaches, such as creative methods and some of the methods that I mentioned earlier. But ultimately, a flexible approach and a blended approach is needed, which is tailored around the needs of those individual communities. Okay, so I will stop there and hand back to Liam.
Thanks, Nicky. And just to echo there, our strategic partnership with the National Archives was so crucial in contextualizing all of this research and making sense of it in terms of what's happening in the wider sector. So a big shout out to the National Archives for that. Right, so I don't know about you, but I want to hear more from our projects. So 5 of our projects have prepared some presentations for us, and we'll hear from 3 of them now, have a bit of a break, and then we'll hear from the final 2 after the break, and then we'll have a Q&A. So get your questions in the chat. I can see that a couple have come through already. First up, we're heading to East Riding Archives with Hannah Stamp.
I'm Hannah Stamp, an archivist at the East Riding Archives, and today I'm going to talk about our project, the East Riding Blockdown, and how we have used video game Minecraft to capture contemporary experiences of the pandemic and also introduce young people to archives. As the County Record Office for the East Riding of Yorkshire, we hold over 800 years of documented East Riding history in our archive at the Treasure House in Beverley. When it comes to the voices of young people, we hold lots of records about them, but yet there are no records created by young people. So young people are our future service users, and we want to inspire them with this project. So we are currently working on a large contemporary collecting project looking to capture and preserve the COVID-19 experiences of East Riding people. But before the Blockdown project, the youth voice remained uncaptured. So as an alternative to oral histories, we thought we could use Minecraft as a creative and storytelling medium with which to capture written and built creations on the theme of lockdown. Minecraft is currently the world's best-selling video game, available across multiple platforms, and it's very familiar to our target audience. The gameplay is like digital Lego, where you can build freely and creatively. You can also explore virtual worlds as a lone adventurer or in multiplayer with friends. The game facilitates collaboration, creation, and digital storytelling. Its world-building features have allowed us to create the central learning and engagement space of the project, which we have called the Archiverse. So let's take a tour. Welcome to the Archiverse, a growing world created for young people to explore and to craft their stories that will transcend through time. At the centre of the Archiverse is a reconstruction of the Treasure House, the home of the East Riding Archives. Never visited an archive before? Don't worry, explore and meet the team. You can speak to the archivists, our conservator, archive assistants, and even researchers to learn all about the archives and gain advice on how to complete your history-making task. Come and explore behind the scenes, including the strong rooms where we hold over 800 years of East Riding history. There's also the blast freezer and the quarantine room. Or why not take a minecart ride through our machinery room? or up and down the tower. Visit our research room and take a book and quill item from the archive box or from our friendly archive assistant at the desk. In your book item, you can write about your lockdown experiences, and these will be preserved in both the Archiverse and the real world archives for others to read and learn from. Stuck for ideas on what to write? Have a look at our participants' contributions on display to learn about how others experience lockdown. Each of these written records are personal experiences of the pandemic, and many of them talk about their feelings, their family life, activities, and their experiences of homeschooling. As the Archiverse world grows with stories, researchers of the future can build a bigger picture of what life was like during the COVID-19 pandemic for young people in the East Riding. If you head outside to the back of the treasure house, you will find the build zone. Here you can see our participants built contributions with each model representing a young person's experience of lockdown. Some key themes include home, education, exercise, and local places. There's also technology and digital communications, and also politics and health topics. Just like the written records, images of these models will also be preserved in the real-world archives for future generations. So back to the real world. For us at the archives, the Archiverse is a platform to create content for contemporary collecting, but it also functions to help people understand and share their stories with each other. The project has been very popular, with over 50 young people being involved, aged between 5 and 15. There are 3 methods of taking part, with all methods requiring a parent or guardian to complete a consent form downloaded from the project website. Consent is crucial because of us working with under 16s, and also to gain permission for us to archive and make their contributions publicly accessible. We maintain an online multiplayer server for gamers wanting to play remotely from home. Over half-term, we were busy delivering face-to-face sessions at local libraries and at the archives. Participants would explore our Archiverse world and craft their contribution for the collections. They would also see, learn, and be inspired by what others have created. Our school workshop enabled a class to work together in the Archiverse in multiplayer, and each participant created a written and built piece for the archives. This is what the session looked like in the Archiverse world. The whole class working together, and we even got to try out a fun, interactive way of evaluating the session by standing next to a number to rate the experience. In terms of long-term public access to these creations, our online catalogue allows researchers to browse a database of everything we hold. This project is catalogued under the collection reference ERBP. Each participant has a unique record, which tells us some information about their project contributions. And our digital repository enables researchers to view the archived images themselves from anywhere on any device. There were lots of organisational challenges, which is a normal process in local authority. All aspects were scrutinised to ensure that legal compliance, network safety, and safeguarding measures were in place. And when it comes to working with technology, just make sure you have friends in IT and anticipate the unpredictable. To create our Archiverse, we had to make sure it was a safe environment for our participants. We also had to create a learning platform using a customised world. And then once people start adding to the world with their creations, we then have to manage world versions after each session. Speaking of unpredictable IT, this is what our online server looked like the first time I logged in. A scene out of a horror film with monsters surrounding the building, ready to vandalize it. I had to quickly figure out where to find the server's disabled mob setting before any further destruction occurred. To have over 50 young people engage with archives for the first time so enthusiastically was fantastic for us to see. From our feedback, they loved that their voice was being added to real history and being able to learn about archives in what they describe as a cool, fun way. So keep an eye out on our website for future developments, and thank you to the Audience Agency for making this happen.
Brilliant to hear from Hannah there. That fusion and integration of gaming and archiving is something that's really exciting. So next up, we're going to go to Lgbt Foundation, and we're going to hear from Nico. So I'll just share my screen again.
Hello, everyone. My name's Nico Dhillon, pronouns they, them. I am the Community Organizing Coordinator at Lgbt Foundation. I am also the project lead on the LGBT plus Community Organizing Oral Histories Digital Archive. And you have had an introduction to this project, so I will try and keep this brief. However, I'm here today to give you a bit of context as to what we got up to share some pictures, and to give some best practice and to give some reflections on how this went. So I'm going to share my screen now and hopefully have no technical errors. There we go. Excellent. So, as I said, yes, my name is Nico, and our project is 8 different interviews. Some are yet to be uploaded, but will be hosted on our website, lgbt.foundation/oral-histories. And our website is visited by tens of thousands of people a year, and this is our most central point to be sharing information. And we feel that this is the most accessible way for people to be accessing new information that may not otherwise access archives. So by building this digital archive, our volunteers who took part in doing the interviewing, but also the LGBT interviewees who participated, have created visible LGBT plus heritage for everyone to engage with, increasing LGBT plus representation in our society's collective memory. We are very proud and grateful to the interviewees, volunteers, and staff who've given their time, energy, and love to making this project a reality. This project has aimed to platform LGBT plus organizers' stories that may not first come to mind when you think of an organizer. My personal role as a community organizing coordinator is all about reframing the idea of making change and how we can all get involved, and that it's not just about marching in the street, and there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes as well as in front of it. We also took a focus in this project on capturing stories that may not already be recorded within LGBT histories, especially from those LGBT people with multiply marginalized experiences and identities. We wanted to highlight the importance of democratizing and diversifying not only those who are accessing archives, but also those who are captured within it, and also those who are telling those stories. We'd always recommend that no matter what project you're working on, whether it's working with communities of identities or location, to always have a look at who you're reaching and how you're reaching them, especially when you're capturing records or information or trying to reflect a society at a point in time or historically or in the future. It's very important to always take a step back and remember the diversity of humans, and that we all exist at these intersections. As you can see on this slide, there are some pictures of our wonderful interviewees. And one quote I wanted to give you was from the fantastic Dennis Queen, who is featured on the left in a lovely rainbow dress. And she said in her feedback about the project, which he's given me permission to share, is, "I was excited that a disabled activist has been included. There's lots of LGBTQI plus disabled activists out there, both in related campaigns and all other movements, such as environment campaigns, the Black Lives Matter movement, and like me, the disabled people's movement. It's nice for any of us to be remembered as part of the wider tapestry of LGBTQI+ activism. So I enjoyed feeling included in an LGBTQI+ history project. So there's a real emphasis on inclusion there. And that's really something that we wanted to keep throughout this project and would like to keep going in future iterations of it. So we had these interviews not only conducted with, but also conducted by LGBTQ+ community members. The community members were identified through a call out into our volunteer pool and also wider using our social media to reach new volunteers who wanted to take part and receive training. And this went really well. And so doing that, having that link between across lived experiences within the LGBT community, but also different generations and also different understandings of history and different interactions with activism, we were able to create tangible links between past, present, and future LGBT activists, learning from each other's lived experiences and knowledge rather than secondhand accounts that may not have the full context or full understanding. So although the interview environment was structured, thank you to Manchester Metropolitan for providing that oral histories training, the purpose of capturing that information, of course, was really necessary. But these interviews were all about letting community members speak for themselves. And that is integral to community organizing to begin with. It's not about putting words in the mouths of anyone else. It's about giving prompts and giving people space to speak for themselves and giving people space to come to their own conclusions and to share the information that they wish to share. And of course, as is best practice with oral histories, all interviewees have been able to give final say and final consent on what goes out into the world. And we're very lucky to say that all interviewees have given consent for their names to be shared today. So this project has allowed LGBT people who have had firsthand experience of anti-LGBT legislation, stigma, and fighting for justice in the past and the present to have their voices heard. This is activism in and of itself. For many LGBT people, you don't know what you can't see. And without us getting these stories out there into the world, we can't change the narratives of what does X look like? What does gay look like? What does bi look like? What does trans look like? And how can we challenge misinformation, or how can we challenge transphobia and homophobia without getting those stories of, well, this is what we look like. So I wanted to finish up with a bit of information about the launch event that we came together in April to do. Having such a range of interviewees and volunteers and staff involved in this project meant we were able to collect wonderful feedback throughout. And this event in person allowed us to invite even more volunteers to take part and to input on what they would like to see in the future as well. As you can see in the middle bottom, we had prompts in the space to ask, what do you love about Greater Manchester? And to give people space to reflect on what do they like, what would they like to change, and what can they do about it? And that is very much integral to what my role is day to day as a community organizing coordinator. So the ownership of the project should very much be by the community and for the community. And this is what we really wanted in this project, is that the words were decided by the volunteers in their training. Although the training was run by the Metropolitan University, the questions were decided by the volunteers. This is what we would like to know from the community organizers invited to share their stories. And it's been really interesting. And these stories have been really essential in showing that anyone can take part. And it's really been very valuable to the wider community organizing conversation. And I wanted to finish up with a final huge thank you to Nicky and Liam and the Audience Agency, alongside the other projects and workshop participants, because I've learned so much taking part in this, and I know that you have too. And it's such a short space of time, but as an organization, we feel so much richer with this information and so much more positive going forward to be able to build on it, to share on it, and to really uplift others and empower people to build their own collective power to make change in their communities and reflect on the past. So thank you very much. I will end it there, and I look forward to your Q&A if you do have any.
Thank you, Nico. Really important piece of research there into using digital archives as a tool for activism. As Nico said, a lot of the projects will be sticking around for questions later on, so do get your questions in. Hope everyone's doing okay. There's loads of information that you're being bombarded with right now, so appreciate that. We've got one more presentation before we're going to have a 10-minute break. So if you hold steady, we're going over to Liverpool now for Tag L8.
Hi everyone.
Hello, we are Dissemination. We are a queer-led community interest company based in Liverpool. My name is Michael.
And this is Monika. And we're here today to talk about our project Tag LA, which is part of our Spirit of Liverpool initiative. Tag LA aims to build an online platform to be owned and run by the community.
Today, we are going to talk about successes, learnings, tips for good practice, and also advice on how to hold safe spaces for communities so that archives can incorporate and respond to diverse perspectives.
In terms of successes, we successfully created 3 different prototypes platforms for local community video. As you can see in the photos, each with their own particularities based on how different groups want to interact and what is more important to them when it comes to view archive. One was an interactive map where people can watch archive films that were made in that area. We also tried Frame.io, where people could add comments and tag videos. And finally, we use an open source video streaming platform where people could upload their videos into a library.
In terms of engaging the community, we created a non-hierarchical learning space online so that there was an influx of information passed between local filmmakers, software programmers, event organizers, and general audiences. We also invited speakers from Northwest Film Archive and London Community Video Archive, who were able to gain feedback from the community and see their work in a different context. It was also really important for us to go and visit organizations from across the postcode to find out what archives existed in the area already.
In terms of legacy, we form a dedicated steering group who will meet regularly, leading to ways of continuing the project and strengthen our partnership with Northwest Film Archive. We are now seeking investment to build our own platform to incorporate the functionalities of 3 prototypes. So therefore, we have formed links with Heritage Lottery Fund at the recent Liverpool conference. And we are also in talks with Liverpool's new digital heritage hub, which will be launching in June.
In terms of the key learnings, we decided to let the participants speak for themselves. So regarding preservation, one participant said that it's realizing how important it is to archive films, especially videotapes, as in VHS tapes, as they are nearing the end of their lives. Archiving my area is important to me because it's part of formalizing living memory.
In terms of interacting with archive, someone said the importance of clear tagging of films to enable users to find what they are looking for. And also another participant said the discussion of decolonization processes around community film content was very nuanced, and the organizers had clearly put through into how this project will provide a foundation for the future development of this discussion.
Regarding digitalization, One said, I discovered there are many types of film archives and not many templates to use. And another said, as a result of the project, I've learned about different archive platforms and developed an awareness of what may be needed in order to make a proper archive for Liverpool 8, and also the way in which other platforms don't work to fit the purpose, but the ways others can.
Regarding Title 8, someone said, I learned it probably needs a paid position, if only for a few hours a week. This way, it will hopefully be maintained properly and regularly. I've learned that it takes a lot more people than I expected to keep this project going. It's a project of love and perseverance, and I really believe in this work.
Next, we're going to give some tips for best practice if you're going to do this kind of work. First of all, it was really important for us to not assume that we knew everything about the community that we live in. So it was really important that we actually asked people if they wanted the platform. Ask a lot of questions and leave time for people to give responses.
It's to not use the word consultation. The community mentioned to us the overuse of this word really creates some mistrust in them. For us, we are aiming for co-creation. Have conversations with the community about your project and be prepared for rejections.
Tell your own stories. Don't be afraid to talk about why this project is important to you. Why are you doing this? And how is it your life story is related to it? Especially emphasize what your local links are.
And finally, always be transparent in terms of how funding is distributed, and understand that research needs time and resources are built into that.
Finally, we're going to focus on safer spaces. This is a big part of our work, and it's something that we really considered when we were holding the online spaces. We always see safe space work as a work in progress, and we understand it's us needing to do the inner work ourselves in order to hold space for others. So number one, building trust is essential. We openly discussed issues of respect in our sessions and asked people how they felt this related to the archive.
Really consider when holding an online space. Probably sounds obvious, but really treat it differently to holding an event in real life.
Consider access requirements and needs. For example, some people have different time pressures and caring responsibilities.
We have neurodiverse people in our group, so facilitation is key. So as best as possible, everyone can express themselves and be understood. And important, keep notes for people who cannot attend.
Check in and check out. Ask people to introduce themselves and make sure no one leaves from your sessions with any overriding concerns.
And finally, be trauma informed, especially when holding space for people who have faced oppression. Treat the work of others with care and involve them in their representation.
So that's it for us. This project has been really great for us. We've learned a lot. I just want to thank the Audience Agency for their support.
And thank you to yourselves for taking time to listen to us and our project. Take care.
Bye. You. See you soon.
Thank you, Monika and Michael. We're going to kick right off again where we left off. We've got two more really great presentations for you, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. Thanks so much for everyone that sent over your questions already. I'm just late picking them up, but we will make sure that all those questions get asked after the next two presentations. So keep them coming in, and we'll finish up with the Q&A later today. So I'm going to share my screen again, and next up we're going to hear from Jewish Museum of London.
Hello, I'm Miranda Baxter.
And I'm Adam Corsini.
And we are coming to you from the Jewish Museum London. We're going to be talking to you today about the Jews Temporary Shelter Cards Mapping Migration Project.
So let's share the screen.
So this project is called the Jews Temporary Shelter Cards Mapping Migration, which came about last autumn. we had about 242 records of individuals' passage through a shelter based in London. So these are individuals migrating from Europe and other places of the world, coming through London, transiting through before they went off to other places in the world. And we wanted to find out more about where these people came from, where they went, who they were they male or female, what sorts of jobs they had. And, you know, reading these cards was really interesting, but we were like, how can we stimulate more research around this and more access to these record cards? So we started a digitization project. This really came about once our museum reopened in July 2021, where we placed all of our collections care front and center in the 3rd floor research center and library, which included a digitization center. We have volunteers up there every day helping digitize our aspects of our archive. And with the Jews Temporary Shelter cards, we really wanted to digitize all of these, but interpret and disseminate the information in new ways, in ways that were you know, in a visual and accessible way. And so we thought, well, could we plot them on a map? But then we thought, well, we don't know how to do that. How do we do that? So let's use georeferencing techniques to inspire future research and knowledge, and to make sure that, you know, we gain new skills around how to do this, and we share those skills with other people so that they too can do that. So what we did was we appointed a research associate named Smyth, who completed his PhD in history and had experience of using georeferencing techniques. He came to the project and helped us create the data sets that we needed to use in mapping these the trajectory of these migrants digitally. What he also did was deliver a series of workshops for people. Anyone could join in on learning about georeferencing for beginners, and then a more advanced session where we were all able to give use our own data and give georeferencing a go. We also created a series of blogs about the project, so you can find out about those on our website. Maybe you came across them already on Twitter, for example. And we also developed a microsite, which Adam is going to show you right now.
So I'll stop sharing this and I'll just share our website. Okay, so this microsite is found underneath the collections pages for our Jewish Museum London website. And what we wanted to do is keep it really simple. We wanted to have 6 different sections within this site. The first is a simple introduction, putting the Jews Temporary Shelter in context from its origins to its final days. We then focused on some key information relating to these specific years from 1941 to 51 that are represented on these records cards. We highlighted 5 different types of information from the different trades, the places of origin, the ages, so on and so forth. Then there's the map that Lewis worked on, which we can explore, the raw data that comes from a Google sheet, some frequently asked questions, and then a little bit about the project. Now, I won't show you everything, but perhaps if we start with exploring the data, this is how we presented this. And as I was saying, you can search for the different fields, such as when people arrived, the country of origin, where they headed to, their ages, their trades, their nationalities, so on and so forth. You can click on a link to go to the full data set as well. At the bottom of each page, there are links to the other sections. So if we wanted to just have a quick snapshot of what that information tells us, we can see that most people are arriving from former Czechoslovakia, but most people were of a Polish nationality. People were heading mainly to somewhere in England, and they stayed for relatively short amount of time when they were there. One of the really interesting things was the age of the residents. Most were in their teens, and then most were traveling as individuals as well. And there's also a nice pie chart with the different types of trades. Now, what we wanted to do, and the main bulk of this was that georeference aspect. So by clicking on the map here, it brings up a map of the world, and we're focusing on Europe here. Our toggle filters on the left-hand side allow you to explore the data by all years or go for a specific year. So for instance, if we go to 1946, it breaks down the information for that year. And then if we zoom into somewhere like London, we can see these different dots where they're plotted. And then if we hover over one of those and click on it, we can see that a box comes up with more specific information based on the data in those records cards. So this particular one, they arrived from England, they were Polish, and then they departed or they stayed in London. Now, what we can also do is attach some arrival and departure lines to these records. So if I just click on those, you'll see all these big lines come up. The really thick line here indicates that most people are coming from Prague and Czechoslovakia. But then there's also interesting aspects to this. So this long pink line here shows us that one person was also arriving from Australia over here. So some of this information we weren't expecting. And it was really when we started to plot this that the visualizations become much more apparent. I'll just go back to the site. And the last page I want to show you is about the project. And just to say that all the videos, the YouTube videos that Lou's presented are accessible on here. So if you do want to find out about georeferencing and have a go yourself, this is a great starting point. I'll stop sharing. End with a few quotes from the project.
So we thought, yeah, to sum up the project, we felt that our participants characterized some of the feelings Jewish Museum staff and volunteers had around, what's something that surprised us? As we already saw, that the number of children arriving at the shelter alone during the post-war period from the Commonwealth and Empire during the 1950s is really surprising, and also resonates now with what we're hearing in the news about the Ukraine war and people, kids traveling on their own to escape someplace that's more safe from where they came from. And also things that we learned. I know that I felt at the beginning of the project, gosh, georeferencing is way beyond me, but actually it's not. And so, one of our participants really felt that the workshop gave them the confidence to give it a go. And in those workshops, participants learned about new tools such as Mapbox, which you can have a go at using if you have a look at one of the videos. You could learn a bit more about the fundamentals of web design. You don't have to be an expert at all. You don't have to do a degree. You just have to learn how to use the tools, and you can make your own maps. And also one of the things someone said was, and we would like to know more too, is about the lives of the individuals before they arrived at the shelter. So, and this is a point of the project, is being able to stimulate more interest and research around what we've learned through the mapping. And also, I think for us, this project has been an experiment. We wanted to experiment with new ways of doing history, new ways of exploring the collection. And we hope that we'll be able to use some of these new techniques in georeferencing as a way of exploring other aspects of our archiving collection. So we're excited that was also recognized by some of our participants as well. So any questions, you could email us at admin@jewishmuseum.org.uk, and we'll look forward to seeing you here at the museum or talking to you more about the project. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Miranda and Adam. A word of caution before anyone goes to their microsite: it is utterly engrossing, so you will lose hours of your day. That's absolutely guaranteed. It's a brilliant way of presenting information and stories. We've got one final presentation as promised, and this is South London Gallery. So stay tuned.
Hi there, I'm Lucy Panesar. I'm a project manager at the University of the Arts London, and I've been seconded to Wikimedia UK for the past year for a project looking at London's colonial histories. And I initiated and have been overseeing this project, Places Never Seen, with Harriet. Hi, Harriet.
Hi, I'm Harriet Vickers. I'm a former art assassin and the South London Gallery Young Researcher for the Places Never Seen project.
So before approaching the South London Gallery to work with me on this, I'd already started opening up some of the kind of archival materials concerning the colonial history of Crystal Palace Park in South London. I'd started looking at this at the start of 2021, and I realised there was lots to uncover and respond to from different angles, and it was important to do that from different angles with different people. So I approached the South London Gallery to work with their youth forum Art Assassins, as they had previous experience of examining colonial archives through a decolonial lens. And I trusted that we'd be able to kind of approach this with safeguarding in mind for all of those involved. And we also hope that the Art Assassins would be interested in looking at this example in Crystal Palace, because it's so close to home. It's a park that some of them have been to as children, or that they at least know about because it's in their area. And we thought for this project, them being Art Assassins and this archive being kind of demanding interpretation, critical engagement interpretation so much, that they'd be well placed to do that through creative methods. So when I first met them back in October, the first creative method that we brought in was collage. And this was specifically based on imagery that was readily available, already out in the public domain. So essentially digital archival stuff that was already on Wikipedia. And the group generated lots of initial questions and responses through this method, as you can see on screen, which then could be followed up later on in the project. I came back a few months later with Stuart Pryor from Wikimedia UK to look at the text that was written on the Festival of Empires Wikipedia page, and also on the main Crystal Palace Wikipedia page, and to demonstrate to the group the possibilities for editing this public knowledge based on the findings that we were gathering as a group. And the group was surprised to learn that Wikipedia can be edited so easily by anyone. And we ended up having a very interesting discussion, didn't we, Harriet, about neutrality of information. So-called neutrality. That was a common theme that kept coming up. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Harriet to talk a little bit about the research that then ensued as part of the project.
Yeah, so I was tasked with researching and kind of finding access points for the Art Assassins to be able to understand this really complicated history. So immediately we listened to voice notes of questions that they'd left for us, and this really instructed our research to kind of find things that they were really interested in. So we found throughout this, we found the use of primary and secondary visual sources really helpful early in the project, and later in the workshops at the CCI, and they were definitely used as a point of reference throughout. But our early workshops were more about gauging a response from the Art Assassins and just giving them a space for informal discussion and a way to process the information that they'd been given. So we gave them a brief and clay to begin to form their responses, and using the clay in the early workshops definitely helped bridge the gap between our research and the creation of our final outcome, which is a 3D worldscape. And some of the sculptures, as you'll see later, were actually scanned and placed into the VR world. But then in the latter part of the project, we collaborated with Jasmine Morris and TechYard and did workshops at the Creative Computing Institute. And we did them in the softwares Tinkercad and FrameVR. And we used Tinkercad to create objects that would go into our world. And then following this, we put them into the wider FrameVR world. And all of the software used was free, and this was important to us so that the software was accessible to the Art Assassins. They wanted to do work outside of the workshop or for their own project. So now we'll go through the final outcome, which is the FrameVR world. So I'll share my screen. Can you see it? Okay. Can you see anything else on the screen, or is it just this?
I can see, yeah, just the VR world and the tabs at the top.
Okay, perfect.
Good, yeah, let's have a look.
Okay, so as you can see, our FrameVR world is very representative of the research we kind of presented in the workshop. So as the Art Assassins project had previously included alternative exhibitions, we wanted to use some of the features of the original festival and reinterpret them to reflect our own contemporary feelings and understandings of this history. So for example, you'll see the all red route that kind of takes us around the exhibition. And this is a very significant point of interest for the Art Assassins. And you can also see here the clay sculptures that we did in the workshop, which relates to the mythical and Paleolithic fictional story of King Lud. And then here you can see a kind of memorial to Samuel Coleridge Taylor, which also has an audio element, but is a slowed down, edited version of his recording, which is also done by the art assassins. And then here we also have the annotated Wikipedia pages, which I think definitely respect the art assassins. They reflect the art assassins' response to the formal nature of Wikipedia. I think for a lot of the art assassins, it's difficult to imagine themselves having the kind of authority to annotate and edit the Wikipedia pages. So it still gave us a way to contribute to Wikipedia, but while staying within our comfort zone of an informal and artistic response. And you can also see our collages that were done early in the project. And yeah, Sophia into your world.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet and Lucy. A truly innovative and valuable and timely intervention there. So those are 5 out of our 10 projects, but just to remind you that all 10 projects are present here today. As we move to a live Q&A now, we're especially keen to hear from those projects we haven't heard from already, although I appreciate some of the questions we've received are project specific. I wonder if, Nicky, is there a question that you think would be good to kick off with?
Sure. I guess it's a fairly open question to any of the projects. But yeah, as Liam says, it might be nice to hear from some of the projects that we haven't heard yet. I'd be really interested to hear any examples of how your experience from leading your project is either feeding into your work now, or how you think it might feed into your work going forwards.
Nico, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, I'm happy. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So I am the community organizing coordinator. So this archive has been very fitting to my role. The hope for this archive is to essentially bring it in. What I'm using it for is when I'm meeting new people and telling them what I'm up to. My job is have a chat with people, see what do they care about in the world. There are lots of issues happening right now. A lot of people feel very passionately about a lot of issues. And I direct them to the archive and I say, a lot of people are like, oh, well, community organizing or activism, that's just, quote unquote, just protesting in the street, or it looks like this one thing, or a person has to look this certain way or be this certain way. And so I've been directing them to the digital archive and I've just said, just go and have a listen, go and have a look, see what you think and come back to me. And let's have this chat again. So it's been really helpful to just kind of reframe what is community organizing for people. And that's my plan, yeah.
That's fantastic. Nico, while I've got you, I want to ask you a follow-up question, if that's okay, because there's one that's come in from Catherine Robbins for you. And they're keen to say that they're asking this because they're grappling with it and not to criticize. But how do you balance having volunteers doing the oral history interviews with the argument that oral history interviewing is a specialized job and should be paid as such? Is it situation specific or something tied into giving people the power to create their own story?
Oh,
It's a very deep question. Thank you, Catherine, for that one.
yeah, thanks. That's a good question. That's a deep question. I would say I would say for me that comes into this idea that for me the whole objective of this project was to completely sort of rethink what is an archive and who gets to access it, as well as who gets to make it. And that, so we did have training from a trained oral historian. They provided training to the volunteers, so everyone had a base level of understanding around the ethics, and we had the proper sort of ethical guidelines in place. But in terms of conducting it, we very much were coming from a place of, yes, the community members should hold that power, and it's that mutual understanding within that space of the interview that everyone has that mutual understanding and respect and lived experience, especially around a topic like community organizing. It's in some ways, I put in an ideal world, I believe that, yeah, it'd be cool if everyone could get paid for everything they do, especially in the world that we live in, but it's removing that hierarchy as well. A lot of these interviewees have done a lot of what they do and do not get paid for it. We did pay them for their time as a thank you for sharing their vulnerability. Just a small voucher as a thank you. But the volunteers are volunteers already with us as the foundation, and they were given the spec and they were given the opportunity to learn new skills, and they jumped on the opportunity to learn from each other. So I hear you, but also I think for me, it was very much central to the intention to rewrite the scripts of changing history and who gets to tell their own history and taking back the power. Yeah.
Thank you, Nico. And that it does all come through in our report as well. So if people are keen to find out a bit more about how volunteering has occurred in different projects across this whole program, there'll be more in the report. But thank you, Nico. That's a really good response, I think. I've got a question here that I just wanted to jump the queue on. Josie's asked, and just while we're in the realm of communities, Josie's asked, I'm interested in how the projects approached how communities understood archives and how they ensured that archives as an area resonated with the communities they worked with. I would like to pick on one of the projects that we haven't heard from yet. Sarah Ann, if you don't want to answer, don't worry, but I was very struck by how in your final showcase event, there were certificates given to all the participants where they had a unique archive code, and I thought it was a wonderful way of making something archive practice, something that's tangible to local communities. Sarah Ann, would you mind elaborating more?
So I'm trying to remember the original question. It was what getting the community to understand an archive. Was that the main thing?
Yeah. So how did the projects approach how communities understood archives, and how did they ensure that archives as an area resonated with the communities they worked with? Sarah Ann, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I've just been sat here listening to all for the past few hours. Just presume you all know who I am. I'm Sarah Ann. I'm part of the Bearwood Interesting Women podcast, and part of that was to create archives of women and social entrepreneurs who have been redefining Bearwood post-pandemic, mainly because women have been making enormous changes in the area of Bearwood for a considerable amount of time, but when I looked, there's virtually nothing in the archive that as part of that legacy of where we are or where we are going. So I felt very passionate that the women that I am aware of who have helped me and who are rebuilding this area right now and are filling the gaps, of which there are many, are remembered and aren't forgotten, and more to the point, aren't owned by another politician in 100 years' time, which is pretty much how I sold it. So how did I get the community to understand the word archive? I didn't use the word archive for quite a while because I say it now, understanding what an archive is, but 6 months ago, if you'd said archive, I literally been like, yeah, not my bag, not my bag. So I repackaged the whole idea and sold it more as a legacy for their grandchildren, or rather their great-great-grandchildren, and a legacy for the great-great-great-grandchildren of Bearwood, so that they knew where they come from, how they got there, and how this particular community has become so vibrant. And once people were really on board with that idea and anonymity of being honest about now in 170 years' time, once they got on board emotionally with that, then I could say, and this is an archive. And then I began to filter in actually what that means and what that looks like. And yes, I created the certificates because we have a brand new is it index catalogue now? I learned too. It's an index catalogue, that's right. I had to Google it all because I was like, what is all this word? What is this? And again, because it's a podcast, unlike a video, there's nothing physical. You listen to it, but you can't see it. And I wanted them to have something that they could hold and something they could see. And also it was a very physical way of saying, right, if you put this certificate here with this number somewhere in a box, don't lose it. And then pointing out it's got the date and it's got the project. And look, here's Sandwell Community Archives written on it. So when your great-grandchildren find this shoved in said book in 100 years' time, they will find you on this number. And I think that for me was a very real way. I'm pretending to hold it. It's a very real way of saying, and this is an archive. Isn't it amazing? Did that answer the question?
Absolutely. It did. It was, I thought it was a wonderful tool. And it really, like you say, I didn't even think about being a digital archives project, how much of it is so intangible, but then to have that certificate at the end, it makes it a lot more real. Thank you, Sarah, and that's a great response. I also wanted to hear from Spectacle, if you don't mind, because Spectacle, you've also been working with communities very closely. Mark, are you there and would like to answer this question as well?
Yeah. So the archive that we were working with is dating back, his video archive shot in the context of participatory video workshops since about 2001 up to the present, up to the pandemic, actually, or just after the pandemic. What we most recently did last week was we had a screening of selections from the archive that had been made by residents, some of whom were around at some points or going back when it was filmed, but also people who are completely new, some of whom were barely born at the time the archive was shot. And we showed in a public community screening in a community centre last Monday. And it had a big impact on all kinds of levels. Actually, immediately after the screening, everyone who was at the screening went to another venue to have a big meeting to discuss how they could change things on their estate, which was quite remarkable. There were people in the audience who were commenting on how they understood other members of their community and what their position was on, I mean, it's too complex to go into the story, but there were lots of people expressing overtly how important having an archive was for both having a kind of testimony, a documentation, snapshots and of life as it was on the estate and what motivated people. So, for instance, someone stood up and said, watching this, and I realized that there were people dealing with the same problems I'm dealing with today, but 20 years ago. And now I completely understand why those early residents were getting frustrated. So it had a big impact. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Mika.
No, hello everyone. No, that was really amazing, and what I found amazing was exactly what Mark was pointing out, how real everything became at the end. Like, despite it being a digital, like, huge pot of information, then extracting, working, chatting through the archive with people involved in filming, or people who were there, or people who didn't know about it, became something that generated action on a very practical level. Like, oh, okay, we had this issue about the community center, let's go and talk about this, because now we know more. We know this is going on for 20 years, and actually, can we get more about that, or can we understand more about that specific issue? I can't remember how it went, and how lucky they felt that they had a documentation that can support real actions on the ground, as well as...
And that also, as Michele was suggesting, more demand on people wanting us to digitize other parts, specific parts of the 350 hours that we have, because they're suddenly realizing the depth of the archive.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's come through almost all the projects, and even from the original application process, we've seen that the appetite is really there amongst many different communities, including those which Spectacle are working with. Thank you, Mark and Michele, for a great response there. The next question I wanted to go to Juan from Qisetna, if Juan, you're available. The next questions come from Natasha Allen Smith. And that is, do you think it would be harder to go into a community and gather stories if the archive or museum or the person representing it didn't have a link to that community? Now, Juan, you've done a lot of great work working with Syrian communities, Syrian diaspora across the UK. I was just wondering if you cared to respond to that question. Oh, I'm not sure if one's available.
Hello, Liam. Yeah, I'm just trying to get the question coming from, it's in the chat, right?
Yes. Would you like me to? So it's, do you think it would be harder to go into a community and gather stories if the archive, museum, or person representing it didn't have a link to that community?
Well, certainly working with the diaspora, the Syrian diaspora, that we're talking of 50,000 people scattered across the country, including Northern Ireland. One of the main challenges had been to build trust, to build a genuine connection with the community, a very, very diverse community with many, many different requirements. People who are recently resettled in the UK through the Vulnerable People Resettlement Program from the British government. People who has perhaps other kind of need other than think about the cultural heritage. People who are trying really hard to adjust to the new community where they are settling, to learn the language, to understand the new culture where they see themselves. So in the middle of this process, that obviously everybody that we've been talking to are processing in a different way. I mean, answering the question is that one of the main core elements of the project is to build trust and genuine connection with that community. I heard many, many times asking me question, why are you so interested in Syrian community when you are not even Syrian? So I've been really in this process of engaging different volunteers, young people and people from the elder generation to think about the value of the cultural heritage, not only for them, but also for us, for the host community, to understand the value of their cultural heritage as a very, very important asset to help them landing in the process of adjusting in being included in the community. We don't like the word integration. I think the word integration implies that you have to forget who you are or where you come from and what you come with you, what kind of heritage you carry with yourself. We've seen that in many other countries, like Sweden, for example, where refugees are required to basically forget where they come from in order to adjust to the Swedish society. Luckily, we're quite happy to see that in places like Manchester, in London, Bristol, there's a lot of an amazing network of civil society being genuinely interested in hosting people who, they are in the process of, as I said, adjusting to the place. We've been connecting with people who are in rural areas, in Somerset, for example. We've been looking at people who are in a tiny island in the Isle of Bute, west coast of Scotland. We also been talking to women who are in Northern Ireland in Belfast, who are trying to understand, their own mental process of adjusting in this new society. So it's a very, very complex process that at the beginning we weren't aware of. And we developed an extraordinary approach of listening. It's very, very important to listen to the community. And we understand this is a very long engagement. It's not something that we can come up with a wonderful archive in just 6-7 months of engagement with the community. We understand the complexity of the different groups. We understand, for example, how young people from the Syrian diaspora are more equipped to understand, to learn, and to adjust to the new framework where they are. Whether the older generation find it more difficult to open up and to engage with the community in Nottingham, in Manchester, in many other places. So we had a social event in central London at the beginning of May, and that was our first opportunity to actually present what we had done, which is a series of podcasts. The podcasts are both in Arabic and English. We're trying to be as accessible as possible. So we presented this work at the Music Library in Westminster Music Library, right in the center of the City of London in Soho. The first thing we wanted to do was to translate all our content into Chinese. Now, that sounds really funny, but we actually wanted to engage the Chinese community that is in Soho and give them the opportunity to come to the event. So we had an event with 71 people, young children and elder generation, not only Syrian or British, but also people from the Chinese community. So that was really brilliant evidence that we're not only doing this for the diaspora, but also for people who are also interested in this.
That's amazing, Juan. I'm so glad that it's been able to reach beyond even who you were intending it to. And I think there is so much more amazing learning that we can get from Juan's project that will be coming through the report. So thanks so much for contributing that answer, Juan. I'm keen to just go to Cinema Nation as well, who I know have also been working in a similar field. Is there anything that you'd like to add? I know that a lot of it came through your presentation already.
Sorry, Liam, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So it is, apologies. Well, actually, I'll go to another question, if you don't mind. But Sophia has asked, that Sophia is interested to hear whether any of the projects think that their work didn't involve activism. Does that include yourselves, or how would you describe your project?
Sorry, just to give a little context to that, because there was a comment of mine before that our formula for the project was sort of digital plus community plus archives, and what the intersection of those three things were. But it seems to me that certainly in all the cases we've heard about today, that activism is either the fourth ingredient, or maybe it's like an inevitable result of combining those three things. And so I just wonder, in a sense, whether we should make activism kind of implicit as part of what we're looking at, if we think to do more work in this area, or whether I'm wrong and there are actually some projects that don't think it was about activism, but it was about other things.
I think Monika and I were just talking very briefly to make it a bit topical about like the anti-archive. We're just reflecting on this news piece about blocking of report, about sort of racial prejudice in Home Office recently, about it being blocked for over a year. And so there's an activism in trying to open up that archive. So that's a sort of a general point, and actually the sort of times that we're living in, that there's lots of refusal of history at the moment. So in a way, so our work, I suppose, is about democratizing it and saying that actually things should be open. So I suppose that is a form of activism at the moment. I don't know if you want to talk about specific to our project.
In terms of our project, we learn a lot, and we were aware that we didn't talk a lot about the platforms we create, which we could do extensively another time, or in another life maybe, because there's so many things going on that maybe by tomorrow our project is already an archive. But what we learn a lot is it's how, when people are looking at a screen in terms of digitalization and in our project, and dealt with a platform, it's how they see themselves represented on that screen and on that platform. So we learn a lot about how we assume that they should be involved, and how assume they should be active, just because the people come and say, you know, suddenly we got these prototypes, hey people, you know, come and participate. And it's how that participation, what does that mean? What activism means, because activism comes as well, it resonates a lot with being active, but why we want them to be active about, what is it in the archive that, or in our platforms, I mean, it's more of a question to ourselves, why we want them to be involved and be active and using a different platform. And we learn a lot about like how communities, they think platforms are things like, and we have a conversation with Leanne about this, well, that we learn how people think have Facebook and upload videos and videos about activism on Facebook. They consider that as a platform, and they consider that as a really active platform where they can express their own concerns. So we also have to be aware of that, you know, of that element of people wanted to participate this way, even though we think Facebook is not run by the community, but it's still listen to that community in terms of being active and action, that activism per se. But sometimes people don't want to be active in that, in the sense of they don't want their work to be, or their stories to be tagged and their activism, because sometimes they don't want to be on those stories either. They don't want to be, their image don't want to be represented, or they don't want to be portrayed on videos and on archive. So I think it's about like, yeah, it's about thinking about what does mean activism in an archive, at least in our platforms. So I extended a bit, I shouldn't.
No, that's a wonderful response. Thank you. And lots to think about. I think that's you know, we could have an entire session built around that topic. So I think, and that is something that we may have to look at in the future, because it is something that loads of the projects have responded to in different ways. So thank you for sharing your response, though, Dissemination. I am terribly sorry to Natasha, Joe and Rachel, I've kept you waiting for far too long, so I'm going to go to your questions. It is a bit of a change of pace. This one, firstly, it's directed to Hannah, but I do think that South London Gallery might be able to respond to this as well. So Hannah, we've got this question from Natasha, which was, how are you planning on cataloguing the models built by the participants? What format will you store them in?
Hi, I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for your question. So how are we cataloguing the models? Well, we're a formal county record office, so we have some established cataloguing software in place. It's called Calm, which ironically doesn't keep us calm, but hey. So we catalogued the records as JPEGs, as screenshots from the game. So once the participants had created their work in the game, I would then hop into the world and take screenshots of their written and built creations. And then, just like any other digital record in our entire collections, we would ingest those, we would admit those into our main digital archive. And then my team would catalogue those in our software called Calm. So it's all done under archives theory. So we would have a collection called the East Riding Blockdown Project, with the reference ERBP. And then underneath the collection, in a sort of like a tree or hierarchy structure, we have different categories. So the different types of participation, we had remote participation as one category, the face-to-face events, and then the school workshops. And then within each category, each participant had their own record, which stated their name, so exactly how their parent or guardian wanted that participant to be credited, and then also a description of the models or the written creations that they created. So every single record on our catalogue is searchable. So if you go onto our catalogue and type in a participant's name, or if you typed in COVID-19 or lockdown, pandemic, these keywords should bring up these records from the Blockdown collection.
That's great, Hannah. I'll go to South London Gallery in a second for their reflections on that question, but I just want to follow up while you're on the line, Hannah, because one of our eagle-eyed viewers, Joe, has spotted, looking at the engagement stats that you presented. They were curious, why do you think it was harder to engage girls with your project?
You know, I was very surprised by this as well, because I always thought Minecraft was a very gender neutral video game. I always describe it as digital Lego. So our marketing of the project actually targeted parents over social media rather than the children themselves, because Facebook doesn't allow such targeting of minors. And the project was also advertised in the head teachers' bulletins across the East Riding, which goes out again to parents. So perhaps it appealed to the parents of male gamers rather than girls. And half of the battle was persuading parents that this was a meaningful project that their child could take part in. So it is a bit of a mystery to me as to why we certainly had a lot more boys than girls. Perhaps I maybe need to target some local all-girls schools and see what what creative experiences they come out with. But yeah, it was a mystery to me too, Joe.
Thank you for an honest response there, Hannah. I think it's the nature of action research is that we are iterative and we're continuing to learn. So it's great that you're able to share those challenges as well as the successes. At South London Gallery, is there anything else that you would like to reflect in terms of using? I know it wasn't Minecraft, but it was also a 3D digital platform that you used. How did you find using that to engage with young people?
And yeah, I don't know if Harriet wants to come in to add any other reflections, but from what I observed, in terms of the question of like, how do you then archive what's gone on in that 3D world? It's interesting to see what's coming up in the chat, that it's a kind of common challenge to be capturing, you know, the complexity of what's happening in those environments. That said, for the project, we're kind of capturing it in stills so that we can sort of document how the group have placed these objects, which are in and of themselves archival materials within the world. But yeah, Harriet, I don't know if you wanted to kind of come in to speak about what that experience seemed like for the group themselves.
I think we also, with the kind of final outcome of the 3D world, we had like us and the art assassins, we kind of had conversation about the connotations of presenting information in certain ways. So, you know, if we were to present the alternative exhibition in a museum or a gallery, you know, that has accessibility limitations. And I think we wanted it to be on the 3D world so that it was kind of accessible to anyone with an internet connection and a device. So yeah.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you for your answers. I am conscious of time now, and we're reaching the very end of it. I just want to make sure that all of our projects have had a chance to speak, though. Miranda and Adam from Jewish Museum London, would you like to reflect just on that last point around how digital platforms are translating into sort of real world engagement? Are you seeing any differences in how you work with groups online to how you work with groups in your museum settings?
Yeah, I can answer. So we were in a very fortunate position during the whole lockdown, really, where we transferred quite a lot of activities online. So, for example, one was virtual classrooms, whereas school children couldn't come into the museum. They engaged online in our classrooms, but now we're starting to see that with the research as well. So this whole project of taking an archive in our collection and then presenting it in a new way has already had some new responses. So we've had some researchers coming off the back of the map that we've created and then start to do further research into that. And some of the participants in the workshop, I think, are inspired to now go off and do similar projects with their own data sets, and us as an organization as well. I think we are now starting a big audit of our collection, and one of the key things we're doing is having a look at which archives we can present in a way that's similar to the work we've done with this project. So I think it has changed a lot of views of what you can do with digital archives across all the board, really.
That's brilliant. And you have inadvertently answered the final question that I had. So thank you, Adam. That was just synergy there. Yeah, so the final question was about how much did the pandemic affect the projects? And I was a bit wary of asking that one because we could have been here for another 2 hours, I think. But thank you, Adam, for drawing on that.
Can I just add to that, though, is that, you know, the positive effect that the pandemic has had on our entire organization. And, you know, it's not just moving all of our engagement online, but it's reprioritized engagement rather than an engagement approach rather than an exhibition-led approach to how we think about who participates and how and why. And so I think it's changed our organizational mindset completely.
Excellent. Thank you, Miranda. And for everybody, really, if you are interested more in the learning that's been gathered from these projects, like what Miranda's mentioned there, and throughout this session, we will be releasing or publishing a report soon, which covers all of this and more. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Nicky, before we sign off today. I am conscious of time and people want to get back to their days. Thank you so much for all the time that you've given to today's session. Nicky, is there one last word from you around the evaluation report?
Just to keep your eye on our website for those resources, and also perhaps we could send a little message out once they're up so that people know where to find them.
Yeah, we'll be sending everything out to those that have signed up to today's session. So thank you once again for attending. Sorry for about the rushed end, but I want to cram in as much as we could to this 2 hours. So thank you again, and we'll see you all soon.